If it's Monday, search and rescue missions are ongoing right now. 5 days after Hurricane Ian first roared ashore in Florida, the death toll is rising as crews reach some of the hardest hit areas. And President Biden surveys the damage in Puerto Rico from a different devastating hurricane. Plus, a rise in violent and racially charged political rhetoric ahead of the midterms, fueled by former President Trump and one senator's very public warning it could cost someone in Congress their life. And the Supreme Court begins a new session amid ongoing protests over its last one, as the conservative court is set to hear cases on issues ranging from race to voting rights and the future of U.S. elections. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. Right now, President Biden is in Puerto Rico assessing firsthand the damage Hurricane Fiona caused to the island last month. It comes as the death toll from Hurricane Ian in Florida last week has now reached 100 after officials in Lee County this afternoon said the death toll has risen to 54 in their county alone. The president will tour the devastation in Florida on Wednesday as rescue crews continue to search for survivors and residents and local governments begin to assess the cost to rebuild. The FEMA administrator is describing it as their largest single search and rescue operation ever in response to a natural disaster. Ian is also likely to be among the costliest natural disasters in American history, with insured losses reaching as high as $47 billion. That's according to one estimate, further exacerbating Florida's property insurance crisis. Meanwhile, in Puerto Rico, where more than 100,000 residents still remain without power after Fiona, President Biden just announced more than $60 million in funding to help strengthen levees and flood walls and create a new flood warning system.
We know that the climate crisis and more extreme weather are going to continue to hit this island and hit the United States overall. And as we rebuild, we have to ensure that we build it to last. We are not leaving here as long as I'm president until everything, I mean this sincerely, until every single thing that we can do is done.
We're going to head to Puerto Rico for more on the president's visit in just a moment, but we do want to begin with NBC's Shaquille Brewster, who has the very latest from Fort Myers, Florida, as the area continues to deal with the fallout of Ian, and also CNBC's Contessa Brewer, who has the latest on the cost of this hurricane and what it's going to take to rebuild. Shaq, I want to begin with you in this devastating news that the death toll of Hurricane Ian has risen to 100. What is the very latest on the search and recovery efforts there?
Hi there, Kristen. And unfortunately, the rise of the death toll is something that local officials have been warning about, and that's because their priority right now is to go through and try to find those people who are missing at this point. You know, during a briefing over the course of the weekend, the question was asked, how many people are unaccounted for? How many people are missing? And the answer that they gave was plenty. They didn't have a specific number. So what you have right now is FEMA and first responders going through Fort Myers Beach area, essentially house by house, where doors still stand, door by door, walking in each home to see if it's occupied or unoccupied. Where homes are occupied, they try to see if there's an emergency or if there's a rescue that needs to take place. There's also dozens of canines that are here that are going through with those FEMA teams. Our colleague Dasha Burns went out with them yesterday, and we got to see how they go through that meticulous process. It's a slow, painstaking process, but it's not only to see if there are rescues, but to see if anyone was left behind in the devastation of the storm. So that is the process that is still well underway, and it's a very slow process, but it's one that unfortunately likely leads to that rise in the death toll, Kristen.
Yeah, it's such a terrible update. And of course, we've been tracking another piece of this story, which the officials in Lee County are facing a number of questions about whether they enacted evacuation orders fast enough. What do we know, and what are they saying? How are they defending themselves?
Yeah, and this really goes to the timeline in when evacuations were ordered and when when the National Weather Service was giving out their guidance. And when you look at the timeline, it was Monday at about 5 p.m. that National Weather Service described the storm surge that was going to hit this area as catastrophic, as life-threatening. The evacuations for this county didn't come until the following morning, that Tuesday morning. That's in comparison to Charlotte County, which is the neighboring county just above Lee County. They had evacuation orders on that Monday afternoon, evening time period. So those are part of the questions that where you have local officials going back and seeing what should have been done differently, because when you look at the emergency planning in this area, you see that time is of the essence. This is a highly populated area. There's not that many roads in and out. So ordering those evacuations and ordering them early is crucial for getting people out. And that's going to be part of the postmortem, the process afterwards, where they go through and see what could have been done better.
And Shaq, can you bring us up to speed? How many people there are still displaced or without power or water?
A significant amount of people without power, but there is some good news there, some hint of good news there. Power officials saying that they hope to restore power to everyone who can take it. If that building is still there and the power line is still working, they hope to restore power to those folks by Sunday. The same is with water. Even in the Fort Myers area, if their building is still there, if the infrastructure can uphold it, they expect that power to be restored by Sunday. But when you look across the state, there are still about 600,000 people without power. The glimmer of hope there, the bright light there, so to speak, is that that number was well over 2 million people just a couple of days ago. So you're seeing the progress. It's happening slowly, but there's still so much more work that needs to be done here, Kristen.
Contessa Brewer, let me bring you into this. This, as we said at the top, could be the costliest hurricane Florida has ever seen. And I think we have a graphic of the cost of past hurricanes just to compare. And you can see there, they're looking at the possibility of $213 billion total. But again, this one could be the costliest. Contessa, who pays to rebuild? And given the economy, is the money there?
Well, those are all great questions. So first of all, CoreLogic says in Florida alone, private property insured losses. So these are people that had coverage on their homes or businesses. It looks like those could be as high as $47 billion. That does not include people who were not insured, and it does not include the damage that happened to infrastructure like roads and bridges. We've heard President Biden say the federal government will go in and help restore the infrastructure, will help rebuild schools and jails and things like that. But in the meantime, a lot of the damage has been caused both on the coast and inland from flooding, and only 18% of Florida homeowners have flood insurance. So that's going to be a real problem because you're going to see an insurance gap. Again, President Biden has said that they're going to go in and they're going to help people with an insurance gap with something like $38,000 for those who have an insurance gap. That barely is going to break the surface if you're talking about the kind of damage that floods can cause. In the meantime, Kristen, this state is in an insurance meltdown anyway, even before the storm made landfall. So it really exacerbates a problem that was already present and the state already knew was going to be a real problem if a storm the category of Ian hit.
So you take me to my next question, and it's such a staggering point that you are making about insurance. Contessa, what does it mean long term? Will we start to see rates go up in Florida? Will some people not be able to get insurance or not be able to live in certain places given that gap that you're talking about and laying out so
absolutely.
clearly?
And that was already happening, Kristen.
Yeah.
You already had 15 insurers fleeing the state because they can't make money there. Insurers have lost money each of the last 5 years. The last 2 years, they've lost $2 billion in underwriting claims. So they can't make money. They have fled the state. Some 7 are insolvent. 27 insurers are on the federal or on the state regulators' watch list for not having enough money to pay out claims for a catastrophe of this nature. So the insurance industry says, watch, you're going to see insurers go under here. And already the insurer of last resort in Florida, Citizens, it's a state-backed insurance company, saw the number of policies double in the last 5 years. Citizens tried to get reinsurance this year, and they said it was so expensive. They got some, but not as much as they wanted for the hurricane season. So what you may see is the insurer of last resort tacking on surcharges for people who are already paying a premium for this last resort insurance.
And Contessa, we're already in a climate where we're dealing with high inflation, we're dealing with supply chain shortages. How does that complicate efforts to rebuild in Florida? I know you can't speak to a specific timeline, but how much could that potentially slow down this process?
Okay, so here's the silver lining. We have seen, for instance, lumber prices moderate some. They're back to pre-pandemic levels. But the Bureau of Labor Statistics says building materials in general are still up 5% about year to date, and then almost 15% over last year. So the price that you're paying for these building goods is more expensive. Supply chains have eased, so getting the products is going to be easier, but getting the contractors who know how to do this is going to be a lot harder. And those contractors can charge what the market will bear. So it's likely to be more expensive. More expensive contractors means more expensive claims, which puts these insurers under either further pressure.
Well, you lay out a really staggering situation. Shaq and Contessa, thank you both for your great reporting and analysis. Really appreciate it. And I'm joined now by Jackie Lezak, president of the Fort Myers Chamber of Commerce. She told us she was able to evacuate at the last possible moment when the storm hit. Jackie, thank you so much for being with us. We are truly so glad to see you, and we're so sorry for what your community has been through.
Thank you. It's been something that you can't even begin to describe, and you feel like you're in the middle of a horror movie and you don't really know how to get out of it. That's the best I can say.
Well, and that is why we are so glad that you are here with us today. And we know how personal this was for you. You said in a previous interview, it was like coming back to another planet when you returned to your home. Take us through your experience of leaving and then coming back.
Well, we have a fairly strong home. We're confident with the builder of the home. And we were in the home up until 9 o'clock that morning. My husband and my son finally convinced me, along with our fire chief, who is a good friend. Look, it's just the way this is. You just should go. And I heeded their warning, and we had already gathered things. So we got in the cars and left. And my understanding now is about 30 minutes later, the water started to come in. So. And one of the things I have to mention is, for Hurricane Irma a few years ago, we were told we would have the same storm surge, 15 to 18 feet, 17 feet, whatever the numbers were. And we actually ended up being on the opposite side of the storm, and all of the water left our island. So I think many of the folks who stayed had that in their mind, and it didn't happen the last time. It's not going to happen this time. We're going to get lucky. And I think that's what caught folks really off guard. It's unfortunate, and we've lost friends, we've lost coworkers. I've heard some stories that would make your toes curl.
I'm so sorry for all of your losses, Jackie. I'm
so very much
hearing you describe those 30 minutes, and it's just hard to imagine. And I wonder if you think the evacuation orders were given early enough and clearly enough and strong enough, given what you went through.
It's hard to say, because you're in such a panic mode anyway when you're faced with this. And, we know, and we live in Florida, we understand the cone of uncertainty. We understand that if you're anywhere in that cone, that you could have this coming straight at you. And I think, hurricanes are unpredictable. They go one way, they go a different way. We haven't seen anything of this magnitude since Andrew. I was here for this then. I was not in Andrew, but I was on the other side of the state. And I think, sometimes memories fade a little bit. We had Charlie back in 2003, and, it was bad, but it wasn't anywhere close to this. I had somebody tell me Charlie was a rainstorm compared to this. So it's, I think memories fade, and I can guarantee you they're not going to fade after this one for a long, long time.
They certainly will not. Walk us through, if you would, the damage to your home and to your business.
So we managed to get back onto the island. I am fortunate enough. I'm the chamber president on the island. I'm also a elected fire commissioner on the island. I own a small hotel that was called the Sea Gypsy Inn. I think you showed some of the video of that a little while ago. So as we were working our way down the island, and of course everyone told me to be prepared for what I was going to see. This is what's left of actually my chamber building. I'm as the chamber president, so that's what's left of my chamber building. They tell you to be prepared for it, but your eyes don't believe what you're actually looking at. And the pictures are square and small, but when you're standing there, it's 360 Panavision, and you're looking at my home. This is where we work. This is where we play. We don't have a restaurant left on the island. We don't, as the official business leader of the community, every single business on this island has been impacted, and it's going to take a lot of time to regroup and to rebuild. And our hearts go out to the workers on the island and the folks who, prepare our meals and serve us our meals and make our beds and welcome our visitors to the island. All of these folks have lost their livelihoods. Many, many of them have lost their homes, and a number of them have lost their lives.
Well, it is so hard to look at those images and to hear you talk about the loss, particularly the loss of your friends and those with whom you work and who are in your community. And we're just so sorry for that. We know that there really no part of Fort Myers that was untouched by the storm. You just showed us all of those images. What is it going to take to rebuild, and are you getting the support that you need from the state and federal governments?
So of course, we've been on the phone with all of our county government levels with the state. I was on the phone with the governor's office earlier today. I've been on the phone with the manager of Lee County. The town is providing the support. It's going to take a concerted effort with incredible amounts of good communication to get us all working together. The support that I have seen coming in from the volunteers and the different folks who have been contacting me at the chamber, I cannot say thank you enough to all of them for everything from, can I lend you, some clothing? Can I give you a bed? Do you need cases of water? We'll bring water, we'll bring food. I just want to give everyone a hearty thank you so much. No offer is unappreciated, and every one of those offers is very, very important to all of us. And I think communication is going to be the biggest key in this recovery effort.
Well, Jackie, we know that over 1 million people visited Lee County this year alone. Tourism was such a big part of your commerce, and I know there are just so many concerns about getting back to that and getting back to that level of tourism and vibrancy. And please know our thoughts are with you.
Thank you. If I can tell you one thing, we will be back, and we will be better than ever. And it is a beautiful island, and you need to come back to support us. When we're ready to be open, we are going to need you to come see us.
Well, it is that type of determination that I think will make all the difference. Jackie Lezak, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. And we want to turn now to NBC's Gabe Gutierrez in Ponce, Puerto Rico, where President Biden spent the day surveying the damage from Hurricane Fiona. So, Gabe, we know President Biden announced $60 million in infrastructure funding for storm preparedness in Puerto Rico. What has the reaction been so far? Do people think that's enough?
Oh, hi there, Kristen. Good afternoon. We've actually moved just a bit further west in Puerto Rico to San German. This is actually one of the communities that was hardest hit by Hurricane Fiona. And as you can see, Kristen, look at some of the damage that is left behind. And this is more than 2 weeks after Fiona. This is a road that partially washed away when the wall of water came through here. And we've been speaking with residents here and also in Ponce, where we were this morning, who have been frustrated by what they see as a lackluster federal response so far. Now, here in Puerto Rico, Luma Energy, the private company that took over power transmission last year, now says that 93% of the customers on this island do have power. That is seen as good news, especially when you consider that it took months for many people in Puerto Rico to get power following Hurricane Maria 5 years ago. However, there are some communities, the other 7% of customers on the island, like San German, that are still struggling without power, Kristen. And we spoke with one woman who told us that she was waiting in line, on hold, rather, by phone for FEMA for hours. Her insulin was damaged. She did not know where to turn to, and she wasn't confident that either the government here in Puerto Rico or the federal government would help her. And so that is what President Biden was coming here today, along with the First Lady and the FEMA administrator, to try and play the role of consoler-in-chief after this hurricane. But yes, as you said, $60 million in new funding to better protect Puerto Rico against future storm, the Biden administration says. But there are questions about whether that will be enough, considering that after Hurricane Maria and also after this storm, the damage extends into the billions, Kristen. So again, some good news in the sense that more of this island has had power restored, but some of the most critical, some of the areas that need it the most are still waiting for power to be restored. And some mayors in some municipalities even took it upon themselves to hire private contractors rather than wait on Luma Energy to come and restore their own power, Kristen.
All right, Gabe Gutierrez, we know it is still an incredibly urgent situation there. Thank you for your reporting from the ground. We really appreciate it. Coming up next, lessons from the Latino vote. We have fresh insight into this diverse and critical voting bloc. We'll break down the very latest NBC News Telemundo poll and what it could mean for this November's midterms. Plus, Donald Trump's feud with Mitch McConnell takes a darker and more dangerous turn than ever before. We'll explain. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. With just 5 weeks until the midterms, new polling has warning signs for Democrats when it comes to a core constituency, Latino voters. According to brand new polling from NBC News and Telemundo, Democrats hold a 21-point lead over Republicans on congressional preference among Latino voters. That's a big number, but check this out. 10 years ago, that gap was double, with Democrats holding a 42-point advantage with Latino voters. Congressional preference in 2012. Movement like that represents a ton of potential votes in key races. Now, breaking down these numbers further, and you see some familiar patterns among Latino voters as compared to the national electorate. For example, support for Democrats is higher with women and in urban areas. And geographically, Latinos in California are more supportive of Democrats than Latinos in Florida. This is an electorate that is as diverse as the nation is, of course. It's a big reason why both parties are targeting Latino voters in November. Joining me now is my NBC News colleague, Natasha Korecki. She recently talked to Latino voters in battleground Nevada, and with me on set is Telemundo news anchor Julio Vaquera. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. Julio, I have to start with you. It's so great to have you here in person.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
What are your key takeaways from this poll?
So, well, number one, I'm glad you said it. Latinos are a diverse group of voters. We talk a lot about it, but I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is a very complex group of voters, and it can be different from district to district. Just take a look at Florida, and you see districts that can be more conservative, and then you can see districts which are more left-wing. So that's point number one. And number two, this is a group of voters that are unhappy with many aspects of the economy, inflation, the quality of their jobs, and that's why the issues that most matter to them are precisely the economy and the quality of their jobs and the cost of life.
Yeah, it's such an important point. And I guess when you think about the divides in the polls now versus when you look back several years ago, the fact that that gap has narrowed so much, and the concern really the Democrats have that Latinos may just sit at home and not turn out to vote, not necessarily that they'll defect to voting for Republicans, for those who do consider themselves to be Democrats, but that they might not be motivated to go out and vote.
And that's what happens with midterm elections, right? If the party in government doesn't deliver, then the voters just reflect that and make them know how they feel. And I think that's probably what might happen with many Latino voters in different parts of the country. They are still leaning Democrat, but yeah, we see this gap getting shorter and shorter.
Natasha, weigh in here, because I know that you have been in Nevada and you've been talking to Latino voters who've been saying exactly that, and that there is some concern that some Latinos may stay at home. And I think Julio hits on a really important point, which is that the economy is still the top issue for so many voters.
Absolutely, and more so in Nevada. Think about Las Vegas. Think about the service industry there. I mean, that is a dominant industry, and that is where so many of the jobs are. And I talked to dozens of Latinos while I was there. I tried to have as many conversations as possible, so I knew what people were talking about. And that's very much it. It's some of them are back to work, but their jobs are not as good as they were before. They're harder. They're not getting paid as well, and there's still unemployment. So there's that aspect of it. They're also saying that it's just more expensive to live. So you pile on gas prices, you pile on inflation. But what was so interesting to me, and you referenced this earlier, was when you say, okay, well, will you vote for Adam Laxalt? And absolutely not. I mean, it was like a very stern no. And some of those responses were from people who had voted for Trump. So that part is very interesting, and it is a nuance here. I mean, the bottom line is these people are not going to show up for Democrats, and that still hurts Democrats. But Republicans aren't exactly, at this moment at least, reaching them with their messaging.
Follow up on that point, Julio, and I think that, just to delve into the Trump factor a little bit, our poll shows that Latino Republicans are more likely to support Donald Trump over the broader Republican Party. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting discovery from this poll. Normally, around 30% of Latinos usually vote for a Republican candidate in a presidential election. And I think Trump adds up into the equation some values that some Latinos might identify with. For example, individualism, economic opportunity. And we have to think about Latinos, as we said, as a very diverse group, and generations matter here. First generation, second generation, or third generation Latinos, many of them, third generations or second, might see themselves as American first, rather than as Latinos. So all these elements matter when it comes to how they feel about a specific candidate.
Yeah, it's such an important point. And Natasha, speaking of that, when you are trying to reach different voters across swaths of age groups, what are the messaging that we are seeing candidates use in Nevada?
Well, Democrats and Republicans are tackling this very differently. And this is kind of indicative of what we're seeing elsewhere in the country in battleground states. Democrats are leaning in heavily on abortion, really leaning in heavily. I talked to Republicans who say at the doors, they heard that less than 3% identified abortion as a top issue. So it's so different. And so Republicans, economy all the way. Were you better off before, than you are now. But with Democrats, it is abortion. But they're also actually very interesting. I followed some canvassers around, and they're talking about housing. And one of the ways they got people to engage was to have them sign, to sign up of a petition so that they could say, we want a freeze on rent here. And people were very interested in that and very receptive to it.
That's so interesting, and we know that all of that came up in the gubernatorial debate that you watched as well, Natasha. Julio, let me give you the final word and let you end on this, which is that we're also watching another story out of Brazil, which is the presidential election there, which is now headed to a runoff after President Bolsonaro did better than expected.
Yes, it's a very interesting story, and basically it's the story of two big personalities, and personality is what matters here. On the one hand, we have Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, a former president. He was a very popular president, 90% job ratings.
More left-leaning than Bolsonaro.
A socialist. Yeah. He managed to lift millions of people from poverty. But then he was accused of corruption. He spent 2 years in jail. The ruling was overruled, so he was able to run again. And then you have Jair Bolsonaro, which is a very right-wing and a very strong personality. He was criticized for his way of responding to the pandemic. He downplayed it for a long time. And he's been compared to Donald Trump because of the way he has been casting doubts around the electoral process. And now Brazilians are going to buckle up for 4 more weeks of constant campaigning and fighting between these two personalities.
All right, well, they'll be buckled up in Brazil and here in the U.S.
That's right.
We're just 5 weeks out from the midterms.
Yeah.
So great to have you here, Julio. Thank you so much. And Natasha, great to see you. Thank you so much for your reporting. And still ahead, an incendiary Trump rally over the weekend highlights rising concerns about violent political rhetoric and threats to lawmakers' safety. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Former President Trump and some of his allies intensified their rhetoric over the weekend. At a Trump rally in Michigan, Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene made some extremely incendiary and false remarks that, quote, Democrats want Republicans dead and they have already started the killing. Mr. Trump later told the crowd that Democrats were, quote, cruel and vindictive left-wing tyrants and accused them of wanting to burn every American institution to the ground. Now, that all came a day after Mr. Trump sent out a message on social media saying that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell had a, quote, death wish for his conduct in the Senate and added a racist remark about McConnell's wife, Elaine Chao. She served as Trump's transportation secretary. This violent rhetoric comes at a time when dozens are on trial for the January 6th attack on the Capitol, and as lawmakers are sounding the alarm about threats they're receiving. In fact, Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins says she recently had a window at her home smashed and told the New York Times that she wouldn't be surprised if a senator or House member were killed, saying that what started with abusive phone calls is now translating into active threats of violence and real violence. Joining me now, my great Monday panel, president of Voto Latino and an NBC News contributor, Maria Teresa Kumar, former RNC communications director and Republican strategist, Doug Heye, and co-founder of Punchbowl News and an NBC News political contributor, Jake Sherman. Thanks to all of you for being here. So, Jake, let's start with this rhetoric that we heard from former President Trump over the weekend. Marjorie Taylor Greene, how concerned are Republicans? Because they're now being asked about this rhetoric, where they stand on this rhetoric.
Define concerned, right? They're not denouncing it, or the ones that do are just very silent and few in number. There's really no incentive for them to say anything against Donald Trump, political incentive, because he's the leader of the party. But what you just quoted is really important, because people don't realize, many people don't realize, members of Congress are not walking around with armed security guards. These are people who live in their communities, who typically are without security details, while members of the leadership have security details. So it's quite scary for rank and file members of Congress to be out there in their communities with the kind of rhetoric that's going on in this country with elected officials. It's frightening.
Yeah, I want to play a little bit of what Rick Scott said over the weekend. He was pressed on this, and I think his response is quite interesting. Take a look.
Senator, the language is what I'm talking about. Isn't that dangerous?
I think we all have to figure out, how do we start bringing people together?
And you would agree that that language doesn't bring people together?
I believe that what the President Trump was talking about is the fact that we can't keep spending money.
That's not what the former president said. And Coco Chow was the phrase he used to refer to a former cabinet secretary, Elaine Chao.
I can try my best to bring people together, and I'm going to try to bring people together.
Okay, but I know, Senator, you know that Democrats have not already started the killings of Republicans, as Marjorie Taylor Greene has said.
I didn't see what she said, but it's also not helpful what the vice president says when she thinks that FEMA is going to treat people differently based on their skin color.
So he tried to redirect to recent comments by the vice president that have come under some scrutiny, but it was noted that that was taken out of context. But Doug, talk about the fact that Rick Scott didn't respond and just what that says about the position this is putting Republicans in.
Yeah, you know, last week when Karine was giving her briefing, she was asked a lot about Joe Biden recognizing Jackie Walorski, and everybody pretty much said, you know, this isn't hard. Here's how you do this. For Senator Scott and others, this shouldn't be hard. Here's what you do. You criticize it, then you move on. And you criticize it strongly because you know that this is going to come again. And the reality is, you know, with what Senator Collins has said, it's not that she's going to be right. She's already right. Steve Scalise was shot. Gabby Giffords was shot. So we're not talking about something that could happen in theory. We're talking about things that have already happened. And Trump is the #1 driver spurring this angry rhetoric on.
Maria, weigh in on this and the fact that, as Doug points out, members of Congress have already been hurt.
Well, and this is an escalation. And what we do know is that Trump's words do have consequences. This was not his words were not directed necessarily to an elected member of Congress, but the El Paso shooting was because of the rhetoric against immigrants and Mexicans, and we saw that on the ground. And unless we actually have Rick Scott channeling John McCain. I remember when John McCain was on the road and someone tried to go after Obama saying that he was Muslim, he denounced it. He said, this is not who we are. This is not our politics. And that's what they need to channel, the Republicans, is channel this patriotism. It's not about party, but it is about national values. One of the biggest challenges I see right now, Kristen, is the fact that we aren't having a conversation that our democracy is at stake. And these types of rhetorics, it's an intimidation model that you often see in banana republics. It's a way to intimidate people from being public servants. The fact that we have someone like Governor Whitmore, who had a kidnapping attempt without any consequences, is laying out the ground for someone to do something that is much more dangerous.
Let's talk about the other thread that we have been following with just 5 weeks until the midterms, which is this new polling from NBC News and Telemundo, which shows that Democrats are losing support among Latino voters. They're still leading overall, but losing support, and real concern, according to reporting from our Natasha Korecki, which we just talked about, that they could stay home. Not necessarily vote Republican, but some of these voters might stay at home. Maria,
that's the whole kit and caboodle, so to speak. As of 3 weeks ago, 51% of registered Latino voters had not received any message from either party, 51%. And if you see who was able to bring the Democrats over the top in the Senate, the White House, and the House. It was the Latino votes, not just in Arizona and not just in Nevada, but in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and even Georgia. And one of the things that we found at Voto Latino is that we actually did an analysis and found that when you serve up a message in the Latino community connecting that their vote worked, that they actually got money in their pockets as a result of the Biden agenda, we saw a 14% increase in participation that they would vote Democrat.
Doug, weigh in here. And if you were advising some of these Republican candidates, if you were advising the candidates in Nevada, for example, what would you say they need to do to win over these disaffected Latino voters?
Well, what I'd say is probably not what they would do. Let's stop talking about sending people to other states and the things like that. And this is the challenge that Republicans face, and it goes to the issue of the rhetoric as well, is what they may want to say to a general election audience, they can't say because they're still communicating to their base. You know, we no longer have the politics of you run to the right in the primary and then you run to the middle in the general. Those politics don't exist anymore. So Republicans are locked in the position quite often, even if they scrub their website on some things. They're locked into a lot of these positions because of Trump and the base.
Jake, your take on this, how significant do you think of an impact this could be in states like Nevada, where, by the way, we're seeing some ticket-splitting voters in some of these states as well? People who are going to vote for different candidates for governor, or different parties, I should say, for governor versus senator.
I think that the thing that we're missing is that even a slight uptick or a slight closing the gap is pretty good for Republicans in many districts across the country, right? Because in close races, if you're closing that gap a little bit, that could help put a candidate over the edge. It's not very complicated. And this is something, by the way, Republicans have worked on for many years, and they've worked on it in states like Texas as well. You mentioned Nevada, you mentioned Arizona. So I think that's a huge deal for Republicans as they go into the next 35 days.
What does it say about our politics right now that we're seeing this play out in these key states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, to name a few more, Maria, that you might have someone vote for a Shapiro, but then potentially vote for a Dr. Oz?
Right. And I think part of it is because it's not getting the Democrats are having a really tough time getting their message out. And they have so many good things to run on. But when it comes to the Latino vote, let's say in Arizona, Nevada, even Texas, the moment that you put MAGA Republican in front of that, that's when you see people sitting out. They don't actually start flipping that seat. And it's to the benefit of both parties to create this level of identifying moderate candidates, because that's actually what what's going to turn people out. But the MAGA Republicans what keeps people either from staying home or riling them up on the other side.
And there's one state we haven't talked about, and that's North Carolina, my home state. The last two polls in the Senate race showed it at 1 point. There's going to be a poll that comes out in about an hour that also shows it at 1 point. So if you're talking about a small subset of voters mattering, that's the state more than any other, with all the cartoon characters that we like to talk about, where you have kind of more normal, traditional candidates running, where it could have a real impact.
That's a great point. Let's talk about another trend that we're seeing that's just fascinating, which is that we're not really hearing Republican candidates talking about repealing Obamacare. For the first time in a long time, Doug, what's going on?
Well, one of the things that Republicans warned about is, or at least privately had conversations with, we'd often talk with Jake about it, is when you bring up a new entitlement, it's really hard to repeal it in any way. So we'd have repeal votes, but they wouldn't do a whole lot. Sometimes we'd have minor things signed. But ultimately, voters became accustomed to it. Voters like it. And what we heard overwhelmingly from 2010 to 2022 is people didn't want their health care messed with, however they defined it. So once you mess with it, you can't mess with it again.
And also the problem is Republicans never had the ability to replace it with anything.
No, we didn't.
So they'd be tearing it away and saying, well, goodbye.
But for years, they said they would come up with something.
Yes, they did, and they failed.
I think the best example right now is all these Republicans, applauding the fact that now people's insulin is at $35. They didn't vote for it, but they are claiming it, and they recognize that that is actually a winning issue.
And when we were trying to repeal, we had our kind of more rank-and-file workhorse members, a Dave Camp, a Paul Ryan, so not your bomb throwers who were doing this, John Klein.
People who were steeped in the policy of this and really trying to get a workaround. Yeah, all right. Well, we will have to end it there. Thank you. Great conversation to get the week started. Really appreciate it, Maria, Doug, and Jake. And coming up next, Ukrainian forces gaining more ground, recapturing more territory from Russia as Putin issues new nuclear threats. We are live in Kyiv next. You're watching Meet the Press now.
For Ukraine, but those that live in these small areas in and around the border, in and around the front lines, they've got a new confidence here.
All right, Jay Gray, we thank you so much for your reporting from Kyiv, and please continue to stay safe. Good to see you. Still ahead, the Supreme Court welcomes its newest justice as a new session of the High Court begins. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. There is some news out of the January 6th committee this afternoon. NBC News has learned that the public hearing that was rescheduled because of Hurricane Ian is now likely to take place on October 13th. That is next Thursday. It is possibly the committee's last public hearing. Now, in other legal news, the Supreme Court's new term has officially opened. The High Court will hear cases on a number of divisive issues, including cases involving race, gay rights, and election laws. But the court is also contending with mounting scrutiny over its own legitimacy, with its own justices sparring publicly about the issue. Just 40% of Americans approve of the job the Supreme Court is doing. That's according to Gallup. That ties for a new low. That same poll found that just 47% of Americans trust the judicial branch altogether. That is a new low as well. I'm joined now to discuss this by former U.S. Attorney and current LA Times legal affairs columnist Harry Litman. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here.
Great to see you. So let's start by talking about this new term. What were your takeaways just from today, this first day of the first new term?
Just from today, it was really noteworthy how active Justice Jackson was in questioning. So she was really mixing it up quite a bit, seemed unafraid from her perch on the far right where a junior justice sits. That was a big one. And then otherwise, it was a very active bench, but nothing new there.
Well, what is notable, and I just talked about the range of cases that they are going to be addressing, from race to gay rights to election laws, all of these flashpoints right now in the U.S. And it comes against this backdrop of the fact that the court is dealing with record low approval ratings. Talk a little bit about what's at stake for the court and what you're going to be watching for.
It's really true, and it's a crisis of their own making. So the cases, and they had a juggernaut of a term last year, obviously, and they have another one poised, and they're going out of the starting blocks very quickly this year, and they're the ones who choose what cases they'll hear. All the sort of hot button ones that are coming up, they didn't have to take them, and they are, and I think most people think it's going to be another sort of rolling set of very conservative results. That's where the crisis does come from, and the sniping that you referred to at the top. You have justices saying publicly, look, there's a problem here when people perceive that what's really happening, the results are really driven because you have new justices in there. So you had this brass knuckle politics that inserted those 3 new Trump justices. Roe versus Wade is overturned, and many other things. And it looks like more of the same coming this term.
There had been all of this discussion when we got that draft of Roe being overturned that Chief Justice John Roberts was potentially trying to make that not be the outcome, to find the middle ground there. But given the numbers, is it possible for him to potentially change any of the outcomes of these cases? You talk about you're potentially bracing for very conservative outcomes.
It's really true. The 5 will work their will, and even though they're new and you might have thought they would proceed kind of methodically, they are just, pedal to the metal, and that was the story of last term. And you're right, even Chief Justice Roberts, who normally would be able to slow them down a bit, he wasn't able to, and in the big cases, it looks like they're going to go where they will go.
I want to ask you about a development out of Trump world, his legal battles. The National Archives saying that there are still documents missing from the former president. Of course, this comes amidst that investigation into potential mishandling of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. How could this potentially weigh into the DOJ investigation?
So, first of all, can you imagine? This is what, the sort of 5th time that he hasn't come totally clean, if it's true. And the way it would figure in is the obstruction charges. So it's one thing to have taken them initially, but the series of transactions where he says, oh, you've got them all now. Oops, a few more. Oh, now we don't have. That all weighs in the federal crime of keeping them, even though you know there's an investigation, and in legal terms, that's an obstruction charge.
And the Oath Keepers trial, opening remarks today for opening arguments, I should say, in the case of Stuart Rhodes.
4-week trial, going to be very dramatic. Rhodes says he'll testify. There will be cooperating witnesses. The department has managed to turn people to testify against them. Seditious conspiracy, always a hard charge to prove, but the DOJ is all in. And that figures for Trump, too, because Rhodes may be saying, hey, I know I was there being violent, but that's because I thought I was answering the call of the President of the United States. So that figures in all these charges about January 6th for Trump as well.
And just finally, all of this is the backdrop as we are reporting at this hour that it is likely there's going to be another hearing next week by the January 6th committee. Now, the January 6th committee has said it will present its evidence when it is ready to do so, when it feels as though it's finished all of its interviews, et cetera. But what will you be watching for in that hearing?
Well, so they have to do two things. They both want to, if Thompson is accurate that this will be the last one, they want to sort of tie it up with a bow, but they also want to have an independent theme as they've so effectively have done in previous hearings. My best guess, it's, just speculation, is we'll be hearing a lot about Roger Stone and the group of people who were in the Willard Hotel who formed something of a bridge between the Rhodes folks and Trump himself.
Interesting. We know that they spoke to Ginny Thomas, so a lot at stake when we hear from them. Thank you so much. We covered so much ground, Harry. Great to see you. And thank you for being with us this hour. NBC News coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.